People think powerful men die in gunfights or explosions. They do not. Most of them die because someone quietly hands them the wrong glass. The violin music floated through the Grand Meridian ballroom like smoke, soft and expensive and fake enough to make my headache worse. Crystal chandeliers reflected across polished marble floors, while Manhattan's wealthiest people laughed over $1,000 wine bottles and charity speeches none of them actually cared about. I balanced a silver tray against my palm and moved between tables and shoes that pinched my heels raw after 9 straight hours of work. My black waitress uniform looked elegant from far away. Up close, the cuffs were fraying. I'd stitched one sleeve myself 3 weeks ago in my apartment kitchen while eating instant ramen over the sink. Table 6 needs another Bordeaux, my manager hissed as he rushed past me. And smile, Corinne. These people tip based on fantasy. Fantasy. Right. Men wearing watches worth more than my yearly rent pretending they cared about sick children because there was a camera near the donation wall. I grabbed the bottle from the service station and turned toward the private dining section near the ballroom terrace. That was when I noticed the bartender freeze. Just for a second. Most people wouldn't have caught it. But growing up with an alcoholic father teaches you to notice tiny shifts in human behavior. The tremor before anger. The silence before something breaks. The bartender glanced toward a man near the back hallway. Dark suit. Silver tie. One small nod. Then the bartender reached beneath the counter and switched glasses. My steps slowed automatically. The wine bottle suddenly felt heavier in my hands. The glass placed beside the reserved seat wasn't the same one from 30 seconds ago. The rim had a faint cloudy streak under the chandelier light. Almost invisible, unless you were looking for it. My stomach tightened. Move. Another server snapped behind me. I realized I'd stopped walking. The private section overlooked the Manhattan skyline through 40-foot windows streaked with rain. 4 men sat at the long black table, surrounded by quiet bodyguards pretending not to watch the room. But only one of them mattered. Lucien DeLuca sat at the head of the table in a charcoal suit so perfectly tailored it looked painted onto him. Mid-30s maybe. Dark hair brushed neatly back. Sharp cheekbones. Calm green eyes that didn't belong to a man capable of mercy. The entire room bent around him without realizing it. Waiters straightened when he looked up. Investors laughed harder when he spoke. Even the musicians seemed quieter near his table. He wasn't just rich. He was the kind of dangerous money people sensed instinctively. I approached carefully, setting the bottle near the center of the table while conversations continued around me. My pulse started pounding harder when I saw the poisoned glass sitting exactly beside Lucien's right hand. No one else noticed. No one else was paying attention. I should have walked away. Smart people walk away. Instead, I reached across the table as if fixing the napkins. I switched his glass with the untouched one beside the councilman. 1 movement. 3 seconds. Silent. Clean. My breathing stopped completely. Then I looked up. Lucien DeLuca was already watching me. Not confused. Not distracted. Watching. His fingers rested against the stem of the new glass, while those cold green eyes locked onto mine across the candlelight. I felt it immediately. That horrible sensation of being fully seen by someone too intelligent to miss details. My throat tightened. Don't react, I told myself. Don't panic. I lowered my eyes first and stepped away from the table before anyone noticed my hands shaking. The violin music continued. Rain hammered the windows harder now. Somewhere behind me, crystal clinked softly against marble. And for the first time all night, I realized I had done something that could save a man's life. Or destroy mine. The strangest part was not that Lucien DeLuca kept staring at me. It was that nobody else in the ballroom seemed brave enough to notice he had stopped talking completely. The councilman beside him lifted the poisoned wine glass while laughing at something one of the investors said. My chest tightened so hard it hurt. I turned away before I could see more and hurried back toward the service station, gripping my tray tightly enough to leave crescent marks in my palm. Corinne, my manager snapped the second I stepped behind the curtain separating the ballroom from the kitchen corridor. Where have you been? Table 14 has been waiting 10 minutes for dessert. Sorry. My voice sounded thin. Distracted. I grabbed 2 cheesecake plates without really seeing them. Around me, the kitchen moved in organized chaos. Servers rushed in and out carrying silver trays. Glasses clinked. Espresso machines hissed. Somebody cursed in Spanish near the dishwashing station. Normal sounds. Safe sounds. But my heartbeat still refused to slow down. Because somewhere inside that ballroom sat a man dangerous enough to make an entire room unconsciously lower their voices. And he had watched me switch his glass. I kept replaying the moment in my head while walking back toward the dining floor. Maybe I had imagined the cloudy residue. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe I had just risked my job over old paranoia. It came from years of unstable people, hidden pills, and liquor bottles wrapped in paper bags. Then the music stopped. Not gradually. Abruptly. 1 second violins filled the ballroom. The next, silence cracked through the room like breaking ice. I froze near the dessert station. A chair scraped loudly across marble floors. Someone gasped. Then came shouting. Not screaming. Wealthy people never screamed immediately. First came confusion. Sharp voices trying to stay composed while panic spread underneath them. Guests stood from their tables. I caught glimpses between moving bodies. The councilman who had taken the switched wine glass leaned sideways in his chair, one hand clutching the white tablecloth beneath him. A waiter rushed forward. Another guest backed away, so quickly champagne spilled onto the floor. My stomach dropped. Oh God, call an ambulance, someone shouted near the front. The ballroom erupted into motion. Security appeared from nowhere, dark suits flooding the room with controlled urgency. Guests pulled out phones despite being told not to. Crystal glasses tipped over. One shattered near the dance floor. Through all of it, Lucien DeLuca never stood up. He remained seated at the head of the table, perfectly still, watching the chaos unfold around him with terrifying calm. And then his eyes found mine again. It felt physical, like cold water down my spine. Every instinct screamed at me to leave immediately. Grab my coat, walk out the employee exit, take the subway home, and pretend none of this had happened. But before I could move, 2 men in black suits stepped directly into my path. Not aggressive, not rough, somehow worse because of how polite they looked. Miss Ashford, the taller one said quietly. Mr. DeLuca would like a word. My mouth went dry. I am working. Not anymore tonight. Around us, the ballroom kept spiraling into confusion while paramedics rushed through the entrance doors carrying equipment bags. Nobody paid attention to me being escorted away. Nobody except Lucien. He finally rose from his chair as I was led toward the private elevators near the terrace hallway. Tall, controlled, one hand sliding calmly into the pocket of his charcoal suit, while frightened millionaires parted around him instinctively. The air changed when he moved. I could feel it. The elevators opened with a soft chime. Gold interior. Mirrored walls. My reflection looked pale under the lights. 26 years old. Cheap earrings. Black uniform. A waitress earning $19 an hour suddenly trapped inside the orbit of a man people feared without saying his name too loudly. The elevator doors began closing. Just before they sealed shut, I looked back one last time toward the ballroom. Paramedics surrounded the councilman now. Rain battered the giant windows overlooking Manhattan. And Lucien DeLuca stood in the center of the storm, watching only me. The elevator climbed in complete silence except for the quiet hum of machinery and the sound of my pulse pounding in my ears. 23 floors. I counted every single one because it stopped me from thinking about the man standing beside me. Lucien DeLuca leaned casually against the mirrored wall with one hand still in his pocket, his expression unreadable beneath the gold elevator lights. Up close, he looked even more dangerous somehow. Not because of muscles or scars or anything obvious. It was the control. The terrifying absence of panic after someone at his table had just collapsed downstairs. Most people would have looked shaken, angry, confused. Lucien looked thoughtful, like he was solving a puzzle, and I was somehow part of it. The taller bodyguard beside me pressed a finger to an earpiece but said nothing. Neither man touched me. They did not need to. Fear handled the job perfectly fine on its own. The elevator opened onto a private penthouse floor wrapped in dark marble and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking rain-soaked Manhattan. The city glowed silver beneath the storm clouds. Yellow taxi lights smeared across wet streets 30 floors below, while thunder rolled somewhere over the Hudson. I hesitated near the doorway. Inside, one of the guards said quietly. Lucien walked past me first without looking back, loosening the cuff of his watch as if this were an ordinary evening. I followed because I did not know what else to do. The penthouse looked less like a home and more like a private museum designed by someone who trusted nobody. Black stone countertops, expensive abstract paintings, Shelves lined with books that looked untouched. Everything immaculate. Cold. Controlled. Like him. One of the guards closed the doors behind us with a soft click that made my stomach tighten. Trapped. Lucien crossed toward the bar near the windows and poured himself a fresh glass of whiskey from a crystal decanter. This time he selected the bottle personally. "You are observant," he said finally. His voice was calm, deep, controlled enough to make me more nervous than shouting would have. I swallowed carefully. "I should go home." "You switch my glass." Not a question. My eyes dropped briefly toward the amber liquid in his hand. Someone was going to drink it. That was not what I asked. Rain streaked across the massive windows behind him while lightning flickered over the skyline. Lucien took a slow sip from the untouched whiskey and kept watching me over the rim of the glass. Waiting. I wrapped my arms around myself to stop my hands from shaking. The bartender changed the glass. "You noticed that from 20 feet away in a crowded ballroom." I noticed things. Clearly. Silence stretched between us. Somewhere in the penthouse, an old clock ticked softly. Every second felt louder than it should have. Lucien set the glass down carefully on the marble counter. "How did you know it was dangerous?" There it was. The real question. Not whether I had switched the glass. Why? I looked away toward the storm outside because it was easier than meeting those cold green eyes. "When I was 12, I said quietly, my father crushed sleeping pills into my mother's wine before parties. He did it so she would not embarrass him." The words felt ugly in my mouth. "Oh, I learned what medicine smells like in alcohol." Lucien said nothing. That somehow made it worse. "Tonight the wine smelled wrong," I continued. "Bitter underneath the fruit. Like chemicals trying to hide." My throat tightened slightly. Maybe I was wrong. "You were not." His answer came immediately. Flat. Certain. I finally looked back at him. Something had shifted in his expression. Not softness. Men like Lucien probably did not survive long by becoming soft. But the sharp edge in his gaze had changed into something more focused. Interested. "Do you always risk your life for strangers?" he asked quietly. I almost laughed at that. Strangers. As if men like him had ever truly been strangers to fear. "No," I whispered. "Usually I mind my own business." A faint sound came from the hallway outside the penthouse. Rapid footsteps. Voices speaking low and urgent. One of the guards moved instantly toward the door. Lucien never looked away from me. Then the guard pressed a hand against his earpiece and said for words that turned the entire room colder. "The bartender is missing." The words settled over the penthouse like smoke. The bartender is missing. Not fired. Not gone home. Missing. I felt the temperature in the room drop even though the fireplace along the far wall still burned softly beneath the television. Lucien stayed perfectly still beside the marble counter, one hand resting near his untouched whiskey while the guard waited for instructions near the door. That calmness terrified me more than anger would have. "Find him," Lucien said quietly. The guard nodded once and disappeared into the hallway immediately. No hesitation. No questions. The second guard remained inside the penthouse near the entrance, broad shoulders rigid beneath his black suit, while rain hammered against the windows overlooking Manhattan. I suddenly became very aware of how alone I was. My phone sat in my locker downstairs. My shift had ended hours ago. Nobody knew where I was except a billionaire crime figure and the men who worked for him. "Sit down, Corinne." The sound of my name in his voice startled me. Low. Controlled. Too familiar for someone I had met less than 2 hours ago. I hesitated before lowering myself carefully onto the leather chair near the dining table. Lucien remained standing, watching me, studying me with the same cold concentration he had used downstairs in the ballroom. "You are afraid," he observed. "I think most people would be. Most people would have ignored the glass." I looked down at my hands folded tightly together in my lap. Maybe most people are smarter than me. Something almost unreadable flickered across his expression. Not amusement exactly. More like disbelief. Lucien crossed the room slowly and stopped beside the windows, the city lights reflecting against the sharp lines of his face. "Do you know what happened downstairs after you left?" The councilman collapsed. He died in the ambulance. My chest tightened painfully. I stared at him without speaking. Dead. The word echoed hollowly inside my head while thunder rolled somewhere over the river. Lucien turned slightly toward me. The poison was fast-acting. Precise. I did not mean for someone else to drink it. My voice cracked quietly at the edges. Guilt hit harder now that the shock had worn off. I could still see the white tablecloth, the overturned wine glass, the confusion spreading through the ballroom, while people backed away pretending not to panic. You prevented the intended target from dying, Lucien said evenly. That matters. Not to the councilman's family. Silence followed that. Heavy silence. The kind that made every sound sharper. Rain against glass. Ice settling in whiskey. My own breathing. Lucien watched me carefully for several long seconds before speaking again. You think this is your fault? Is it not? No. His answer came immediately. Certain. The fault belongs to the person who poisoned the glass. I looked away because something about hearing reassurance from a man like him felt deeply unsettling. Dangerous in a completely different way. You should let me leave, I whispered. I saw nothing. I will not speak to anyone. Lucien's gaze sharpened slightly. That would be difficult considering the entire ballroom watched my security escort you upstairs. Right. Of course they had. My stomach sank further. Besides, he continued calmly, if someone inside my organization attempted this tonight, then anyone who interfered with their plan is no longer safe. The realization hit slowly. Then all at once. The poison glass. The missing bartender. The way Lucien's men moved like they were expecting betrayal from within. I wrapped my arms tighter around myself against a chill that had nothing to do with the storm outside. I am a waitress, I said quietly. I cannot be part of whatever this is. You already are. The words landed softly. Somehow that made them worse. A knock sounded against the penthouse door. The remaining guard opened it halfway while speaking in low Italian too quickly for me to understand. Lucien listened without interrupting. Then his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The guard stepped aside. Another man entered the penthouse wearing a dark navy suit dampened by rain. Mid-40s maybe. Silver threaded through black hair. Intelligent eyes. He stopped the moment he saw me sitting near the windows. Surprise flashed briefly across his face before disappearing behind professionalism. Lucien, he said carefully, we found the bartender's car abandoned 6 blocks away. I held my breath. The older man glanced toward me again. And there is something else, he added quietly. Your guest's apartment was searched tonight. For a second, I honestly thought I had heard him wrong. My apartment. Searched. The words did not feel real. They floated somewhere above me while the rest of my body turned cold and numb inside the leather chair. What do you mean searched? I asked quietly. The older man looked toward Lucien before answering. Like permission mattered more than urgency. Someone entered your building approximately 40 minutes ago, he said. Your landlord reported a broken lock and signs of forced entry. My throat tightened. 40 minutes ago. Around the same time I had been standing upstairs in this penthouse, trying to explain why I switched a wine glass. Lucien's expression hardened slightly, though his voice remained calm. Was anything taken? Not that we can tell yet. The older man paused briefly. But whoever went inside knew exactly which apartment belonged to her. The room fell silent again. I stared down at my hands because suddenly I could picture my tiny apartment too clearly. The chipped white cabinets. The old upright piano near the window with missing ivory keys. My coffee mug still sitting beside the sink from that morning because I had been late for work. Someone had been inside my home, breathing my air, touching my things. I need to go there, I whispered automatically. Lucien answered before anyone else could. No. The firmness in his voice made me look up at once. That is my apartment, I said. Which is precisely why you are not returning tonight, he replied. You cannot keep me here. I can keep you alive. The words landed hard between us. Not cruel, not emotional, matter of fact. That somehow made them impossible to argue with. The older man stepped further into the penthouse and placed a folder carefully onto the marble counter near Lucien. There is something else you should know, he said quietly. Security footage from the ballroom was partially erased. Lucien's eyes narrowed slightly. Partially. Everything from the main floor remains intact except the section near your table between 9:34 and 9:37. My stomach dropped. The exact moment I had switched the glasses. Lucien opened the folder without speaking. Rain continued battering the windows behind him while he studied the photographs inside. His face revealed nothing. No anger. No shock. Just calculation. Like pieces on a chessboard rearranging in his mind. Inside job. The older man murmured carefully. Someone anticipated the poison would fail. Lucien closed the folder slowly. Or anticipated witnesses. Witnesses. The words settled heavily in my chest. That was what I was now. Not a waitress. Not a woman trying to survive double shifts and overdue rent. A witness. I suddenly hated the way Lucien looked at me. Not because it felt threatening anymore. Worse, because it felt protective. Who are you? I asked before I could stop myself. The older man blinked once, surprised by the question. Then he gave a small nod. Matteo Verani. I handle Mr. DeLuca's legal and business affairs. Legal and business affairs. Right. Because men like Lucien did not call people fixers anymore. They hired attorneys in tailored suits who spoke softly while cleaning disasters behind closed doors. Matteo studied me for a moment with something almost sympathetic in his eyes. Miss Ashford, if someone entered your apartment tonight, it means your involvement is already known. That makes you vulnerable. Vulnerable. Such a polite word for terrified. I stood abruptly from the chair and crossed toward the windows, wrapping my arms tightly around myself while staring out at Manhattan below. The city looked beautiful during storms, glittering and distant and completely indifferent to human fear. Yellow headlights moved slowly through wet streets 29 floors below while thunder rolled over the skyline. Somewhere out there sat my apartment with a broken lock and strangers' fingerprints still lingering inside. I did not ask for any of this. I whispered. Behind me, I heard soft footsteps crossing the penthouse floor. Then Lucien's voice, quieter now. Closer. Neither did I. I turned before I could stop myself. He stood only a few feet away beneath the dim gold lighting, dark green eyes fixed entirely on me. For the first time that night, he looked tired. Not weak. Men like Lucien probably did not know how to become weak, but exhausted in a way deeper than lack of sleep. Like betrayal itself weighed something physical. Whoever did this, he said softly, expected me to die tonight. Lightning flashed beyond the windows, illuminating the city in cold white light for half a second. Lucien never looked away from me, and now they know you stopped it. I did not sleep that night. I tried. Around 3 in the morning, one of Lucien's staff brought me clean clothes. She said the guest suite down the hall was ready for me. Guest suite. The phrase sounded absurd considering the circumstances. Like I was visiting a luxury hotel instead of hiding inside the penthouse of a man powerful enough to make people disappear from security footage. The room itself was larger than my entire apartment. Soft gray walls. A king-sized bed untouched beneath dim amber lighting. Fresh towels folded perfectly beside a marble bathroom sink. Somebody had even placed tea on the nightstand beside the bed like they thought comfort could erase fear. I sat near the window instead, knees pulled against my chest while Manhattan glowed beneath the storm outside. Every time headlights moved below, my pulse jumped. Every elevator sound beyond the hallway made my stomach tighten. My apartment had been searched. Someone had erased security footage. And downstairs in the ballroom, a man had died drinking from a glass meant for Lucien DeLuca. None of this felt survivable anymore. Around 4:15, soft piano music drifted faintly through the penthouse. I froze at first, listening carefully. Slow. Melancholy. Not recorded. Live. I stepped quietly into the hallway before I could change my mind. The penthouse lights had dimmed overnight, leaving only soft golden lamps glowing against dark marble floors. The music led me toward the far end near the windows overlooking Central Park. Lucien sat alone at a black grand piano beneath the city lights. No suit jacket now, just dark slacks and a white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled neatly to his forearms. His fingers moved across the keys with controlled precision while rain streaked softly against the glass behind him. For a moment, he did not look dangerous at all, just tired. Human. I should have gone back to the guest room immediately. Instead, I stood there listening until the final note faded into silence. Lucien spoke without turning around. You are awake. So are you. A faint exhale escaped him. Almost a laugh. I rarely sleep after betrayal. The honesty in that answer caught me off guard. I stepped closer carefully, stopping several feet away from the piano. I did not know you played. There are many things you do not know about me, Corinne. His voice stayed soft. The weight beneath it settled heavily between us. Lucien finally looked up then, green eyes shadowed beneath the low lighting. You play too. I blinked. How would you know that? Your fingertips. He nodded slightly toward my hands. Calluses on the left. Piano, not guitar. Heat rushed unexpectedly into my face. There is an upright in my apartment, I admitted quietly. It belonged to my mother. Lucien studied me for a long moment before turning slightly on the piano bench. Come here. Every instinct warned me not to move closer. I ignored it anyway. The marble floor felt cold beneath my bare feet as I approached the piano carefully. Lucien shifted just enough to make space beside him on the bench. Not touching. Never touching. Somehow that restraint felt more intimate than contact would have. Play something, he said. I cannot. You can. I stared down at the black and white keys. Expensive piano. Perfectly tuned. Probably worth more than my student loans. I am nervous. Good, Lucien murmured. Nervous people tell the truth. I looked sideways at him then. Is that what this is? Another interrogation? No. His gaze held mine calmly. This is curiosity. The honesty in that answer unsettled me more than threats would have. Slowly, I lowered my fingers onto the piano keys. The first notes came quietly. Uncertain. An old melody my mother used to play during thunderstorms when I was little and afraid of the dark. Lucien stayed completely silent while I played. No interruptions. No questions. Just listening. The city lights reflected across the piano's glossy surface, while dawn slowly began bleeding pale blue across the Manhattan skyline. Somewhere during the music, my breathing finally steadied for the first time all night. Then Lucien spoke softly into the silence between notes. Whoever came after me tonight, he said, will try again. My fingers stilled against the keys. And this time, he continued quietly, they know exactly what you look like. Morning arrived gray and heavy over Manhattan. The storm had passed sometime after sunrise, but the city still looked washed cold beneath low clouds and wet streets reflecting silver light between skyscrapers. I stood in the penthouse kitchen in borrowed clothes. A cup of coffee cooled in my hands while Lucien spoke quietly with Matteo near the windows. They kept their voices low, but tension carried differently around men used to power. You could feel it even in silence. The board meeting is moved to tonight, Matteo murmured. Everyone will be there. Lucien nodded once without taking his eyes off the skyline. Good. You suspect someone specific? I suspect everyone. Matteo glanced briefly toward me before lowering his voice further. And the girl? Girl. Not woman. Not witness. Just girl. I stared harder into my coffee cup to avoid reacting. Lucien answered without hesitation. She stays here. Matteo's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. Concern maybe. Surprise. Lucien, that is not a discussion. The room went still after that. Matteo gave one slow nod before collecting his folder from the counter. I will tighten security. He left a minute later, the penthouse doors closing softly behind him. I finally looked toward Lucien. You cannot keep saying things like that. He loosened the cufflinks at his wrist while crossing toward the kitchen island. Like what? She stays here. You would prefer your apartment? His calm tone made frustration flare unexpectedly inside me. I would prefer my life back. Something unreadable passed briefly through his expression. Regret maybe. But it disappeared too quickly to trust. That is no longer possible, he said quietly. I hated how true that sounded. The coffee suddenly tasted bitter. I set the mug down harder than intended. I crossed toward the windows and wrapped my arms around myself, while taxis crawled through morning traffic far below. You keep speaking like everything is already decided. In my world, Lucien replied calmly behind me. Hesitation gets people hurt. I turned sharply. Maybe I do not want to be part of your world. His gaze held mine steadily. Neither did the councilman. The words knocked the air from my lungs. Not cruel. Honest. That honesty made them impossible to dismiss. Before I could answer, the penthouse intercom buzzed softly near the entrance. One of the guards spoke briefly into it before opening the door. A woman stepped inside carrying 2 garment bags and a leather case of cosmetics. Early 40s. Elegant black suit. Efficient eyes. She paused when she noticed me standing barefoot near the windows. Miss Ashford, she said politely. I am here to prepare you. I blinked. Prepare me for what? Lucien answered instead. Tonight. Tonight what? The board meeting. I stared at him in disbelief. Absolutely not. Lucien did not blink. You are safer beside me than hidden somewhere alone. I stared at him. You think bringing me into a room full of dangerous men is safer? Yes. The certainty in his voice terrified me because he genuinely meant it. The woman carrying the garment bags remained professionally silent while tension stretched across the penthouse. Finally, Lucien stepped closer, not enough to touch me, but close enough that I caught the faint scent of cedar and expensive cologne lingering from last night. "Listen carefully, Corinne," he said softly. "Someone inside my organization tried to kill me. Someone erased footage of you switching those glasses. Someone searched your apartment before midnight." His eyes locked onto mine completely. "That means you matter now." My pulse stumbled painfully at those words. Not because they sounded romantic. They did not. They sounded dangerous. Permanent. "I am a waitress," I whispered again, weaker this time. Lucien's expression softened by the smallest fraction, barely visible. "No," he said quietly. "You are the reason I survived yesterday." Silence filled the room after that. The stylist slowly unzipped one of the garment bags near the kitchen island, revealing dark emerald fabric beneath protective plastic. Expensive. Elegant. Completely out of place in my life. I looked from the dress to Lucien standing motionless beneath the gray Manhattan light. "You cannot honestly expect me to walk into some secret meeting beside you pretending I belong there." "You do not need to pretend," he replied. Thunder rumbled faintly somewhere far beyond the city, even though the storm had already passed. Lucien held my gaze steadily while the skyline reflected behind him in cold silver glass. "The moment you switched that glass," he said softly, "you became part of this story whether you wanted to or not." By 7 that evening, Manhattan looked different from 30 floors above. The storm had cleared, leaving the streets slick with gold and white reflections between the towers. I stood in front of the penthouse mirror, barely recognizing myself. The emerald dress fit too well. My hair had been loosened into dark waves. The woman staring back looked like she belonged beside dangerous men instead of carrying champagne through crowded ballrooms. I hated how quickly expensive fabric could disguise fear. "You look frightened," the stylist said while fastening a bracelet at my wrist. "I am." She offered a brief, sympathetic smile. Good instincts usually feel like fear. When she left, the penthouse fell quiet again. Lucien stood near the windows, buttoning a black suit jacket, all sharp lines, and contained power beneath the city lights. He looked like the version of himself newspapers preferred, polished, wealthy, impossible to accuse of anything concrete. Then he lifted his eyes to me, and the room changed. His gaze lingered just long enough to make my pulse stumble. Then he said, "The dress works." I folded my arms. "I still think this is a terrible idea." "Probably," he said, reaching for sparkling water instead of whiskey. "But terrible ideas seem to be carrying us." Against my will, I almost smiled. It vanished when he stepped closer and lowered his voice. "When we arrive tonight, stay beside me. If anything feels wrong, tell me immediately. You expect another attack. I expect betrayal to adapt." The elevator ride to the garage passed in silence. Matteo waited beside a black armored sedan with 2 guards posted nearby, his expression already sharpened by bad news. Once we were inside the car and moving through wet Manhattan traffic, Lucien read a message on his phone and his jaw tightened. "One of the board members canceled," he said. "At the last minute. That matters. He never misses." Outside the tinted windows, normal life kept moving. Couples crossed intersections with coffee cups. Restaurants glowed warm behind glass. The ordinary city kept pretending power, and fear only happened in movies. We stopped at a red light in Midtown. A black SUV eased up beside us and stayed there. Lucien went still so fast it made my breath catch. Not tense, not startled, predatory. His hand slid across the seat until it rested beside mine. "Do not move," he said quietly. The driver said nothing. Matteo turned slightly in the front seat, watching the SUV through the mirror while his fingers touched his earpiece. For one suspended second, the entire intersection felt sealed in glass. Then the light changed. Neither vehicle moved. My heartbeat hammered against my ribs. Finally, the SUV rolled ahead and disappeared into traffic. I let out a slow breath I had not realized I was holding. Lucien kept his eyes on the rear window a moment longer before leaning back. "Was that them?" I whispered. "Maybe. You make everything sound comforting." A faint, humorless curve touched his mouth. "That is not one of my talents." The rest of the drive passed under a silence so heavy it felt rehearsed. By the time the sedan turned through iron gates near the East River, my nerves were stretched thin enough to sing. Inside, the building looked like old New York money preserved behind locked doors. Dark wood walls, chandeliers, oil portraits. Men who hid violence behind tailored suits. Conversation dropped the moment Lucien entered. Then every eye slid toward me. Some men avoided looking at him directly. Others studied the waitress now seated at his right hand. The meeting began in polished language about contracts, votes, and shipments, but I watched faces instead of listening. Halfway down the table, Vincent Caruso smiled through every sentence. Yet each time Lucien challenged him, Vincent's fingers tapped once against the polished wood. Sharp, rhythmic, familiar. The same nervous rhythm as the bartender at the gala. Then Vincent reached for his water, and I saw pale powder trapped in the seam of his cuff. "Do not drink anything," I whispered. Silence slammed across the room. Lucien stood. Guards moved. Vincent stayed seated, almost amused. "You trust the waitress more than family?" he asked. "She sees what others miss," Lucien said. Vincent looked at me with open dislike. "You should have stayed invisible." Then the fire alarm erupted. Red lights flooded the ceiling. Gunshots cracked in the hallway. Lucien seized my wrist and pulled me behind him while Matteo forced open a side panel hidden in the wall. We ran through a narrow service corridor as smoke leaked under one door and men shouted somewhere below. At the stairwell, Matteo fired back once, then sent us upward. My dress caught around my legs until Lucien tore the hem loose with one hard yank. The rooftop door burst open to cold air and a skyline still wet from the storm. For half a second, I thought we were clear. Then Vincent stepped from behind an air unit with a gun and 2 men beside him. "I built your father's empire and got scraps," he said to Lucien. "You turned fear into paperwork." Lucien moved in front of me. "So you poisoned a councilman and searched her apartment." Vincent shrugged. "Witnesses make me nervous." One of his gunmen lifted a weapon. Matteo fired from the stairwell. The roof exploded into motion. Lucien shoved me behind a vent and returned fire. One man dropped near the parapet. Another ran straight into Lucien's security, charging onto the roof from below. Vincent lunged, caught my arm, and dragged me up against him with the gun pressed to my ribs. "Tell them to back up," he hissed. Lucien froze 6 feet away, gun lowered but eyes locked on Vincent's hand. Fear should have emptied my mind. Instead, I remembered what had saved Lucien twice already. Men reveal themselves in tiny habits. Vincent's grip shifted when he spoke. I drove my heel into his foot and twisted. He cursed, loosened his hold, and Lucien fired. Vincent went down hard, his weapon skidding across wet concrete before guards pinned him. Only then did I realize I was shaking. Lucien reached me in 3 strides. "Are you hurt?" His hands hovered near my shoulders, asking permission without words. "No," I managed. Matteo came up breathing hard. Vincent was alive. Another board member had funded the backup crew. The cleanup would last hours. Lucien told him to handle it and never took his eyes off me. When the alarms below finally cut out, dawn had begun bleaching the skyline silver. I walked to the parapet because I needed something solid beneath me. Lucien joined me, close enough for warmth, not touching. "You saved my life twice," he said. "That sounds like blame." He let out a tired breath that was almost a laugh. I told him his world had nearly killed me. He said he knew, and for once he did not hide behind control. If I wanted out when this ended, he would make it happen. New apartment, new name, distance. I turned toward him. In the pale morning light, he looked less like a legend and more like a man who had survived too many betrayals alone. "And if I don't want you deciding everything for me?" I asked. His gaze held mine. Then I learned. That answer landed harder than a grand promise would have. No lies. No claim that life beside him would be safe. Just honesty. Wind lifted the torn edge of my dress while Manhattan woke beneath us. My old life was gone. His empire was wounded, and neither of us could pretend the night had changed nothing. "I am still a waitress," I said softly. "You are still the woman who saw what everyone else missed," Lucien said, and the only person in that room who refused to look away. We stood together as sunrise spread over the city. We were exhausted and unsteady, but no longer alone. "Whatever comes next," he said quietly, "you will not face it alone." This time the silence between us felt nothing like fear.